Hey, welcome back to Geek-Dom. I'm your host, Don. And today, we're going to be going over something a little different. Going to be going over just basic install of Ansible and how to do a couple things in it. Now, Ansible is a configuration management tool, kind of. Probably not saying that right. It allows you to modify and make changes to remote systems. Super easy to install. What I have here is I've got two dev Raspberry Pis. One set up as a server, one set up as a client. Now, it's just a basic sudo apt-get install Ansible. I'm not going to bore you with watching all this paint dry. But you do this, it does take a few minutes. But then there's a couple things you need to do before you can start using it. So this is going from the premise of it's installed. This is also going with that you've set up SSH key authentication. I've got a video on how to do that. It just makes it a lot simpler. I'm sure there's smarter people out there who can tell me what I'm doing wrong if I don't use SSH key. But I do it, one, for security, and two, it just simplifies making connections in Ansible. So if you haven't set that up on your systems, please, I'll put a link below. Definitely saves a lot of headaches. So one of the first things you're going to want to do is you want to edit the Ansible config file located in etc Ansible CFG. Now this file is the basic configuration for Ansible. It allows you to go and change some of the defaults. Say you don't want your library or any of this where it's listed here, you can go and change it. Sudo user, I'll show you in the playbook how to set this, but you can set a default sudo user so you're not using root for everything. Again, you know, with my setup, I changed my Pi user ID to something else. Put a link to that video. But here we can go ahead and set Pi as our default user. If we're using, like myself, I don't use the standard SSH port. Again, for safety, it gives me that warm whoopee of comfort by changing standard settings. There's some more stuff down here that's beyond the scope of this video, and honestly beyond the scope of my knowledge. But, you know, Google's out there, you can find a lot of these. So next thing we want to do is we need to tell Ansible what's out there. So normally when you start this up, I did do some prep before doing this video. You get a lot of examples. If you just start typing IPs, host names, whatever, there's not really any organization, which that's fine. But you can group these as you see, specify any group headers up at the top. And the way you do that is come up with names that you want. However you want to organize it, put it in a bracket, give it a name, in bracket, next line down. I'm not a fan of typing out IP addresses all the time. So here I'm going to use a host name, but we're going to have to do one further step for this Raspberry Pi to know. So here you can group it by server, by client, just however you want to. So with that, we're going to save it. Now to get those host names to work, we need to tell our operating system here what IP they go to. So yeah, in my production and my dev here, I do this on all my host files. But I don't do it manually on each one, which we'll get to here in a little bit. Okay, so now a Raspberry Pi knows the IP address for dev2. Gonna save that. And now we just want to test to see if Ansible works. So for that, you want to do an Ansible-all, or space all, -m and ping. And this is telling Ansible to ping everything in its inventory. Here's our first roadblock. If you haven't SSH'd into your client machines, it's going to ask you if you want to add it. Between that and the SSH password, it kind of gets stuck in a loop sometimes. But at the end of the day, I don't want to do this every single time. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to SSH to my two dev machines here. And yes, I'm going to SSH from dev 1 into dev 1, just so I can get those fingerprints into the known hosts. Okay, so now let's try that ping again. So now we're not being asked to add it to our known hosts. Now we're being asked for the password, and that's your SSH password. So what we're going to do is do an SSH-agent space bash, and then we're going to add our SSH key into the session with an SSH-add, and then the full path into our ID RSA file. Now once we put the passphrase in here, we don't have to do that again for this session. So I'm all about saving time and saving keystrokes. So now, alright, we didn't get any errors. We got success that it was able to ping everything that's in inventory. That's great, but it's not really useful. This is just merely a test for seeing if your Ansible works. So what I do under my profile is I create an Ansible folder. Under that Ansible, I create two other folders, one being for playbooks and one being for files. Files being, at times I need to copy configuration files out to my different Raspberry Pis, and that's where I store them. So one of the other things I like to do on a fresh install is I like to set up a template. Like I said, I already did some prep here. The language playbooks used is YML, yet another markup language. Super easy to read. Here, host, target, I put that in specifically so I can specify the command line. User pi, become, yes, I want to become user pi. Gather information, and that's just quick and dirty, so I don't have to do that every single time. Because one of the things I found out, there's a whole, but let me back up. Once you have that template, you can actually copy that into a new file, and then you don't have to go through that whole setup again. Because going back to the whole debate between tab and space, for you Silicon Valley fans out there, for whatever reason, when I do a tab within any of these playbooks, it causes problems. So here, the name I'm putting, I'm just creating a simple, I want to reboot these servers, or these Raspberry Pis. So now to do that, it's going to be Ansible-playbook, -E for the E is for extra variable. This is where we're going to specify the target. Now you can do this by IP address, you can do it by a machine name, or a group that we created in that Ansible host file. The next D is another variable. Now it's going to be Ansible_become_pass, and that's going to be our sudo password for the remote machine. My super secret password there. And now we're going to specify what playbook we want to run. So okay, good, no errors. It did its checking, and it already signaled for that dev2 to go ahead and reboot. So we'll give it a minute here for that machine to come back up. This is where a second seems like days. And let's go ahead and try. Oh, of course not. And just fire dev2 up here again. Come on. Okay. So as you can see here, the task, okay, it found everything, it made a change. So that's handy if you have a lot of systems to reboot. But one of the big strong points of Ansible is not having to touch every single one of your devices to make configuration changes. So I'm going to copy that template file to host, YML, and I'm going to set up how to modify the host file on all the Raspberry Pis in my dev group here. So here, same basic information. So here we're going to give the task a name. This is where formatting counts. So block and file, what that means is I'm going to add a block to a file. I'm not going to completely copy over the file. I'm just going to add a section to it. And then path to the file, which in this instance is going to be the host file for the machines. Marker. This is a really handy feature to where you can mark the beginning and the end of what you modified. So give it something meaningful. So this one is going to mark the beginning of when it's inserted. Okay, and here's where we're going to put the information or the block information that we want. And this is where I really need to get my number pads set up because I make mistakes like that all the time. So just like you would manually put it in a host file, that's the information we're going to put here. Okay. Now we need to add in the end marker. Well, sorry. Backup, yes, I want to back up that original host file just in case I do make a mistake. Okay, so as you can see, I went over to dev2 and the host file does not have any of the information we put in. So I'm also going to change this to all. That means everything in the Ansible host file is going to get this change. And now remember where I said space or extra characters or formatting is really important? So when I accidentally used my number pad instead of my number row at the top, I messed something up, so I did some behind the scenes work here real quick to clean it up. It will tell you what line is messed up, but just for the sake of the video, I went through and cleaned it up offline. And now we're going to run it again. So good. It's found both devices. It changed both devices. and everything's okay. So now if we go back to dev2, run that same command, there's the information we just put in. Now you're probably not going to have to change host files all the time, but this should get you to start thinking of what you can do. One of the big things I do a lot of times is known host files or authorized keys. Because I do blow up my Raspberry Pis, I got to recreate them, and then this allows me to go and change that new information out on all the Raspberry Pis instead of manually hitting each one. And I will go through that further in videos down the road. This just kind of get you in, get your feet wet. If you have questions, comments, please let me know. If you liked it, learned anything, please think about hitting that subscribe and like button. And hope to see you guys next time. Thanks.